Hey home bakers, it's Jack here at bakewithjack.co.uk, and have you always imagined your sourdough to come out looking like this? But sometimes it comes out looking like this, or that, or maybe even this. Crumbs! Well, you are in the right place. Roll that theme tune. Hello to you, welcome back to the Bake with Jack YouTube channel where I make videos to help you make bread. And if you've experienced your sourdough loaf busting out somewhere that you hadn't intended it to, you might be led to believe it's something to do with that cut that you made. Like it's not deep enough or it's too shallow. What? But let me tell you a secret. The way that cut opens is never really to do with the cut. At least it's not entirely about the cut alone. Sure, the cut is important, a nice swift slash at a shallow angle with something super sharp like a grignette, for example, available to purchase from the Bake with Jack online shop at bakewithjack.co.uk/shop. But what you're actually trying to achieve here is something much simpler. If a loaf is to bust open at all, and that's another topic for another day, it will always bust open where it is the weakest. Say it with me because it's important. Your loaf will always bust open where it is weakest. The point of the cut is, and wait for it, to deliberately create a weak spot upon your loaf for it to bust open nicely. And so, if your loaf busts open somewhere where you didn't want it to, something is causing that area to be the weakest, weaker than the part that you cut, or causing it to become the weakest part as it bakes. And all you have to do is find out what that thing is and fix it. Here's a few pointers to help you out on your way. People bake sourdough on a stone for a reason. When your dough hits that hot stone, it immediately seals off the bottom of the loaf, not unlike when we create a crispy underside of a pizza, for example. Also, the immediate heat applied to the underside of your loaf will encourage it to jump up nicely, and that big lift in volume in a short space of time is what will bust open your crust, hopefully where you intended it to. If the stone is not hot enough or you are baking on a tray, then it won't immediately seal off that underside. Moisture will build up between dough and tray or stone, and it will cause that area to be the weakest, and so it will bust open there. Even if you're baking on a preheated tray, it is so thin. The dough will take the heat from the tray almost straight away and you'll be back to square one, cold tray territory. Get yourself a baking stone and heat it up really well for like 30-40 minutes before you load your bread. Baking in a humid environment will help keep the entire outside of the loaf softer for longer, meaning that part where you cut it, where you deliberately weakened it, will continue to be the weakest point for that crucial first 8, 10, 12, 15 minutes of baking time where the oven spring busts open the crust. If there is not enough steam, or your oven doesn't keep it in all that well, or you didn't even use steam in the first place, the outside of your loaf and your precision incision will go dry, and once again that underside edge of your loaf where dough meets tray or stone will become the weakest point where the moisture builds up. And then use maximum steam with hot water from the kettle poured into a deep roasting tray at the bottom of your oven, and if it doesn't keep it in all that well, hey, if you've got space underneath, double up your trays. Use 2 trays if you've got the room. Why not? A great way to make additional steam in your oven is to bake more bread at one time. Bread makes its own steam, so it makes sense that if you baked 4 loaves together, for example, they'd all benefit one another. But if your loaves are too close together, moisture might build up in between the two, making those closest sides weaker over the cut that you made. Then you'll get these kind of in-between side busted loaves that join each other like conjoined twins. Comment below if you've made conjoined twin loaves. Space them out as far as your baking stone allows to give them as much space in between them for the moisture to escape. An element on the roof of an electric oven might well be making it hotter on top. The way the fan moves the air inside might be blowing hot air over the top of your loaf. Gas ovens are always way hotter on the top than on the bottom, and you probably know exactly what I'm going to say next. If your oven is way hotter on the top than on the bottom, that nice slice that you made, that swift slash across the top of your loaf that you had just one shot at, so you paid so much attention to getting it just right, it dries out. a crust forms there. And once again, that tricky area where dough meets tray or stone, where your loaf rests its plump, soft rump, that becomes the area where the moisture builds up, and it's weakest there. It's weaker than that dried out top surface you're so patiently watching, hopefully waiting for the bust that never came. I feel your pain. If this is you, it's not over because your oven says so. All ovens have their challenges, and it's something we have to adapt to. Maximize steam in your oven as much as you can, and if you are baking multiple loaves, load the bottom ones before you load the top ones so the top one doesn't dry out while you're messing about with the bottom shelf. If the element is on the top of an electric oven, try to overheat your oven when you preheat it. And then when your loaf goes in, turn it back down to your desired temperature so that it doesn't click on that element on the top and toast off that top surface. One more thing before we go. The often quoted go-to answer for this problem is to simply look at a loaf of bread and go, that's underproofed. And while that will make things worse in terms of the fact that an underproofed loaf, a loaf that hasn't rested and or puffed up enough, will hold more power to bust open your loaf in an undesired way, it will only exacerbate and contribute to existing problems instead of being the problem all by itself. If your loaf is to burst at all, I hope you've gathered from this video that the cause is a simple one and the fix is going to take some practice. Have a play, do your best, follow the principles we talk about here, and remember your mantra. If your loaf is to burst at all, it will always burst open where it's weakest. Sit cross-legged on the floor, straight back, hands in your lap, eyes closed, and say it with me. If your loaf is to burst at all, it will always burst open where it's weakest. Find out why that is. Make up a reason that makes sense in your mind and tweak something for next time. And stay strong. You'll crack it. I believe it. See ya.